from its composition to its potential for housing human life and more. Join me as I show you some facts and the history of Venus. Number 8. The history of Venus. Before we get into the facts and figures and the numbers behind the planet that is Venus, we probably should talk about how we discovered it. After all, astronomy has been going on for a very long time, and people have found planets like Venus before you would expect them to. In the Old Babylonian period, the planet Venus was known as Ninsi'anna, and later as Dilbat. The name Ninsi'anna translates to Divine Lady, illumination of heaven, which refers to Venus as the brightest visible star. The ancient Greeks initially believed Venus to be two separate stars, Phosphorus, the morning star, and Hesperus, the evening star. Pliny the Elder credited the realization that they were a single object to Pythagoras in the 6th century BCE, while Diogenes Laërtius argued that Parmenides was probably responsible for this rediscovery. Though they recognized Venus as a single object, the ancient Romans continued to designate the morning aspect of Venus as Lucifer, literally light bringer, and the evening aspect as Vesper, both of which are literal translations of their traditional Greek names. When the Italian physicist Galileo Galilei first observed the planet in the early 17th century, he found it showed phases like the moon, varying from crescent to gibbous to full and vice versa. When Venus is furthest from the sun in the sky, it shows a half-lit phase, and when it is closest to the sun in the sky, it shows as a crescent or full phase. This could be possible only if Venus orbited the sun, and this was among the first observations to clearly contradict the Ptolemaic geocentric model that the solar system was concentric and centered on Earth, which was one of many theories about how our world and our universe were at the center of it all, when in fact that couldn't be farther from the truth. The atmosphere of Venus was discovered in 1761 by Russian polymath Mikhail Lomonosov. Venus's atmosphere was observed in 1790 by German astronomer Johann Schroeder. Schroeder found when the planet was a thin crescent, the cusps extended through more than 180 degrees. He correctly surmised this was due to scattering of sunlight in a dense atmosphere. Later, American astronomer Chester Smith Lyman observed a complete ring around the dark side of the planet when it was at inferior conjunction, providing further evidence for an atmosphere. Believe it or not, it wasn't until the 1900s when more details and research was done on Venus, mainly because its shape, distance, and phases didn't give a lot of clues as to its various inner workings. Radar observations in the 1970s revealed details of the Venusian surface for the first time, thus giving scientists much more to work with. The first robotic space probe mission to Venus, and the first to any planet, began with the Soviet Venera program in 1961. The United States' exploration of Venus had its first success with the Mariner 2 mission on December 14, 1962, becoming the world's first successful interplanetary mission, passing 34,833 kilometers, 21,644 miles, above the surface of Venus and gathering data on the planet's atmosphere. Since then, numerous probes and satellites have been taken to Venus to study it in some capacity. There have even been talks of putting a rover on the planet in the same style that NASA has done with Mars, but that hasn't happened as of yet. Number 7. Orbits and rotations. Venus is known as our sister planet because in many ways it's like Earth. It's only a little bit smaller, has an atmosphere that is full of gases, and we do know that it has a distinctive surface like certain other planets in our solar system, but we'll get to that more later. Although it should be noted that despite the similarities to Earth, there are just as many differences that we'll be covering a lot in this list for various reasons. If you want to get really trippy on how different Earth and Venus are, you need to talk about how Venus handles its days and years, because not unlike its own neighbor, Mercury, Venus has a very slow rotation, but to the extent that it's actually longer than a year. Yeah, that's right, a day is longer than a year on Venus. Its orbital period, or how long it takes to make a full rotation around the Sun, is about 225 Earth days, whereas a singular day on Venus is 243 days. That's weird. More than that though, it feels rather counterintuitive, because especially with how we live here on Earth, when it comes to years, they're the longest basic measurement of time. Many years make a decade, and so on. But when you think about how we count our lives, it's in years. So for a single day on Venus to be more than a year on Venus, that's really weird. And yet that's exactly what happens on the planet. So if we're going to live there, more on that in a bit as well, we're going to have to get used to some very funky things. Number 6. Seasons. When it comes to the seasons on Venus, it's definitely not like Earth is in any measure. In fact, it's kind of worse. As you likely know, the temperature on Venus is extremely hot. The average temperature is about 460 degrees Celsius due to the greenhouse effect that essentially turned the planet into an oven. That's a big reason why we don't dare try and colonize Venus, because anything we make would have to be able to withstand that heat, and that's not easy. A heat, by the way, that makes it the hottest planet in our solar system, even beating Mercury, which is closer to the Sun than Venus is. Plus, the tilt of the axis on the planet is so minimal that the temperature honestly doesn't change much on the surface of the planet. So seasons, as we know them, would be mostly hot to very hot, with little regard for things like cold or cool. When you add that up, it means that Venus is a place that nobody wants to live on, unless you're talking about in the atmosphere, where it's technically possible for us to live, but we'll get to that in a bit. Before we continue to break down everything about Venus, be sure to like or dislike the video so that we can continue to improve and make these videos better for you, the viewer. Plus, be sure to subscribe to the channel so that you don't miss any of our weekly videos. Number 5. Greenhouse effect. Let's be honest here. When you think about Venus, you no doubt think about how it's a greenhouse planet, meaning that it has gases within its atmosphere that trap heat at such a rate that it makes it boiling hot. And that's very, very true. Studies have suggested that billions of years ago, Venus's atmosphere was much more like the one surrounding Earth, further proving it to be our sister planet, and that there may have been substantial quantities of liquid water on the surface. But after a period of 600 million to several billion years, a runaway greenhouse effect was caused by the evaporation of that original water, which created a critical level of greenhouse gases in its atmosphere. As a result, the planet is so hot that it can melt lead. And to many, Venus is the perfect example of what will happen to Earth if we're not careful with how we handle our own greenhouse gases. Number 4. Volcanic activity. When you think about Earth, it has many things that can shape the land, and one of them is volcanoes. They literally create islands when they erupt out of the ocean, and they can cause widespread destruction when they're erupting above the waters, like with Pompeii or Montana. Yet, did you know that Venus has a lot of volcanoes as well? What's more, it helped make the planet what it is today. Much of the Venusian surface appears to have been shaped by volcanic activity in some way, shape, or form. Venus has several times as many volcanoes as Earth, and it has 167 large volcanoes that are over 100 kilometers, 62 miles across. The only volcanic complex of this size on Earth is the Big Island of Hawaii, 154. This is not because Venus is more volcanically active than Earth, but because its crust is older. Earth's oceanic crust is continually recycled by subduction at the boundaries of tectonic plates, and has an average age of about 100 million years, whereas the Venusian surface is estimated to be 300 to 600 million years old. The volcanic activity is also believed to be a major reason that the atmosphere is what it is today, but more on that in a sec. Number 3. Pop culture. Named after the goddess of love and beauty, Venus has become nearly synonymous with women in popular culture. As referenced by the famous relationship guide Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus. Venus has also been used as the name for various beauty products and lyrics in songs like I'm Your Venus. As a solar system locale, Venus was a popular destination for early 20th century science fiction writers, before we knew about what lay beneath Venus's mysterious cloud cover. Writers could speculate about a more hospitable planet and its possible inhabitants. More recently, Venus has been a backdrop for video games such as Transhuman Space, Battlezone, and Destiny. And in the Disney animated film The Princess and the Frog, Ray the Firefly falls in love with Venus, the evening star, as he has mistaken it for another firefly. Various other sci-fi television shows and movies have made their own stakes on what Venus would be like as well, making it all the more curious to some that were not trying to colonize it and instead going to Mars, but there are many reasons for that. Number 2. atmosphere. When it comes to planets, one of the first things that people talk about in regards to habitability is that of the atmosphere, which is where we get a major problem. Conditions on the Venusian surface differ radically from those on Earth because its dense atmosphere is 96.5 carbon dioxide, with most of the remaining 3.5 being nitrogen. If you're keeping track, that means that the planet has virtually no oxygen. To be clear, Earth's atmosphere doesn't have all oxygen either, but it's balanced with the elements of nitrogen, carbon dioxide, and others in order to let us breathe. But on Venus, that would be impossible for a whole host of reasons, not just that there's no oxygen in it for the most part. For example, remember those volcanoes we talked about earlier? They had a significant impact on the atmosphere because they added loads of sulfur into it. The atmosphere is acidic because of it. Sulfuric acid, if you're wanting the more scientific term. There is literally a cloud layer on Venus that is comprised of it. If that's still not enough for you, the mass of its atmosphere is 93 times that of Earth's, whereas the pressure at its surface is about 92 times that of Earth's, a pressure equivalent to that at a depth of nearly 1 kilometer or 0.62 miles under Earth's oceans, which means that any attempt to put a human on the surface of Venus would need a suit to be specially pressurized to combat the atmosphere. Number 1. Cloud City on Venus. I want you to picture Star Wars for a second, specifically Cloud City from The Empire Strikes Back. Remember how it was a city that was quite literally floating above the clouds? Well, there are some scientists who believe that we could do something like this on Venus and have a better life there than on the ground. How does that work? Simple. On the ground, the gases of Venus are so dense and troubling that having a colony there would be problematic. However, the higher you go into the atmosphere, the thinner the gases get. And scientists have theorized that at about 30 miles above the ground, there is a sweet spot that humans could use to survive long term, as well as a spot that is modest in temperature and pressure exerted. How do we get to be in a spot 30 miles above the surface? With a floating city or colony of sorts. I can hear the question in your mind, but wouldn't it be hard to keep the floating city afloat? Usually, yes, it would be, which is why, barring anti-gravity technology, we'll never have such a city on Earth. However, on Venus, the many gases in the atmosphere could be used by the blimps or however the colony is built to keep it afloat. It's actually been proposed before by scientists and is technically feasible with the technology we have right now. Plus, unlike a domed colony that we would have to have on Mars or the Moon, if something were to happen to the blimp, say a small tear in the hull, it wouldn't crash the whole thing or cause a series of catastrophic events that would kill everyone, as Venus's atmosphere is thick like Earth's, so we would have time to fix it before things got bad. And as noted, the pressure and temperature of the spot in the atmosphere the colony would be means that keeping it cool or warmed wouldn't take much energy or effort. Now, can we definitely say that we're going to be colonizing Venus soon? Of course not. That would be foolish. But whereas we were once very deterred from the notion, there is a chance and possibility now that this could happen, which is not unlike where we were with Mars at the beginning of the new millennium. And if we can get something working on Mars with its issues, something on Venus doesn't seem so far-fetched. Thanks for watching, everyone. What did you think of this look at Venus and its history? Did you learn something new about Venus as a whole? Do you think that we'll ever truly colonize it? Let me know in the comments below. Be sure to subscribe, and I'll see you next time on the channel.